Todd Muller.
Mr Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to stand in support for the final third reading, the Social Security Clothing Allowances for Orphans and Unsupported Children Amendment Bill. Can I first acknowledge or make a comment on the previous speaker? I find it quite extraordinary how every time they get up and bemoan the fact that the government side is taking due consideration in terms of their responses to these bills and taking our full calls, only to then spend the next 10 minutes stepping through in fairly woe-betide tones the various reasons why ultimately they think they might support the bill. Whereas perhaps if they were going to stand by their intent, they'd sit down after 10 seconds, and that would have certainly pleased some of us on this side and perhaps the wider chamber. But I will, of course, take my full call because this deserves to have an appropriate consideration. And as I say, it's great to be able to stand here for the third and final time and speak in support of this bill. And it does feel actually like I've spoken more than 3 times on these bills. You know, there's certain bills that when you speak to, they sort of go through bang, 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 and you feel like you've spoken a couple of times and it's done. But this is a bill that I feel like I've spoken more than 3 times on. But perhaps that's true. Perhaps it's just one of those bills that have got through to me and sort of impacted me. Look, it's a fair bill, Mr Speaker. Kin carers are entitled to assistance to help with the costs of raising orphaned or unsupported children. And in 2009, as most of the House would know, national insured kin carers got the same weekly amount as foster carers. And of course now with this bill, we will match this with the closing of the clothing allowance inequity. Can I first, Mr Speaker, acknowledge those who do provide care to our most vulnerable. Mr Speaker, a few months ago I spent a little bit of time up in a lovely place called Dargaville. And when I was out there, I met... I will, I met some foster parents, actually. Mr Speaker, I met some foster parents from Dargaville. And the foster parents in Dargaville, whilst not kin carers, gave me, for perhaps the first time, a very close understanding around the commitment that it takes to open your family to those who you know need help and vulnerability. And so I think this is something perhaps you would like to listen to on the other side. When you open your hearts and your family to people who are in need of help, and when you actually sat and spoke with this family, husband and wife, they live a number of miles out of Dargaville, they're involved in a dairy farm, they've got 3 kids of their own, but they have 2 that they have brought into their family and are providing them support. And obviously I got the opportunity to be able to see firsthand the stress, the impacts, the joy and love that that environment does create, for particularly those who are coming in and having that support. But it also did give me an insight to some of the challenges that those families are under, Mr Speaker. And of course they shared with me some of the allowances and support they receive as foster carers. And it did, I'll be honest, give me a sharper and more acute understanding of those who are involved in this caring and the support that is available for them, and the importance of ensuring that this bill is supported and that the clothing allowance that is provided to kin carers can be provided to kin carers, because clearly it is currently an omission. Kin carers, there are a number of them in the community that I represent in Te Puna. It is a strongly Māori community. I've had a number of engagement with many families from that area, and as often is the Māori tradition, there are a number who are providing support and for those of their wider whānau who for various reasons don't necessarily have the support of mum or dad or both. And so I have seen that in action, and I have seen the power of it, particularly when it is provided by an uncle or auntie, or in some cases, grandparents. So, Mr Speaker, I am in awe of people who make this commitment for their whānau and family. and for the impact that they provide on those children's lives, and I do want to acknowledge them tonight here. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we're talking big numbers of New Zealand children who are looked after by their wider New Zealand family. 12,000 New Zealand children, 8,600 carers, and half of them, Mr. Speaker, grandparents. And I want to particularly acknowledge them and you tonight, particularly the grandparents who are looking after their grandchildren in this context. As I have mentioned in this House before, Mr. Speaker, as we have traversed this bill through its various readings, when you are a grandparent, you're in a particular stage on life where arguably, finally, you can focus perhaps on your own needs, and yet there is many families and grandparents in this country who actually give up their retirement and their needs to be able to provide support and love and care for their wider whānau. And look, Mr. Speaker, this is a huge personal sacrifice. You know, I've never met a grandparent who wouldn't put their hand up for babysitting, but it takes a different type of person and a different type of commitment to be able to step in and take the role of a parent in a kin carer context, particularly when you are older in years. Many would want to flop into the sofa and say, see you later, the grandparents grandkids after the visit, but this is a particular cohort who stay engaged and provide that love and support full-time for their whānau. Mr. Speaker, the government acknowledges this effort and, of course, through this bill is providing additional support. We have heard and discussed through this bill the Extraordinary Care Fund that is available, that is assisting more than 300 children and young people have benefited. That equates to an average about $2,000 a child. You know, what is this money spent on, Mr. Speaker? Extra tuition for kids struggling in school maybe, or orthodontic work that hasn't been funded by the Ministry of Health, maybe covering costs to be able to attend regional sports tournaments. These are examples of what this funding has actually been able to support in terms of the family environment. Maybe music lessons where the children was progressing ahead of their peers. These are all examples of the Extraordinary Care Fund in action, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, we are providing this extra support so the children in this environment can obviously have the opportunity to reach their full potential.
Ask the member to address the bill for a while.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of the... thank you.
Order. Can the member take a seat? I don't expect to have negative comments about my rulings or positive comments about my rulings. I think the member knows that she shouldn't comment on Speaker's rulings, and I don't want to hear it again. Todd Muller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, as discussed through the Select Committee process, grandparents in particular who are kin carers have the opportunity to get access to work and income support, both in terms of a case manager to help them navigating their role through as kin carers. And I think that does need to be acknowledged. There is a particular course that has been put in place, Mr. Speaker, to enable kin carers, particularly grandparents who are now having the opportunity to be able to step forward and provide this support, perhaps haven't been full-time parents for quite a while, giving them support, $600,000 a year, this program facilitated by the parenting course, and I think that's very positive. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I do want to acknowledge Tracy Martin. This is a good bill, Mr. Speaker. It has wide support across the House, and I think it is important to acknowledge that when good policy arrives, that wherever it comes, it should be acknowledged and supported. And clearly, this government has seen the merits in this bill and is now supporting it, which is acknowledgement of Tracy Martin's tenacity and the acknowledgement of her particular passion for this community within our wider country. And so she does deserve that acknowledgement. She has been a fierce advocate for these children and for families that are in this position. And whilst we may not always agree on all aspects of the policy response and the priorities of that and the sequencing of it, it is important to acknowledge courage when you see it, good policy when you see it, and good effort when you see it. So I acknowledge you, Tracy Martin, and put my support to this bill. Thank you.
Carmel Cipollone.
Mr. Speaker, it's really